she walked through the tall glass doors of the massive tech headquarters with her badge trembling slightly in her hand. It was her first day at Vanguard Systems, one of the most influential artificial intelligence companies in the world, a place built by men, run by men, and shaped by the standards of men. Her name was Liana Blake, and she had spent the last 7 years of her life studying machine learning, neural architecture, and quantum data processing. She had written research papers that won national competitions. She had designed prototypes that won her scholarships. She had built algorithms that could predict disease patterns before symptoms began. Yet, despite all this brilliance, she knew the world around her would only see one thing: a young woman in a field where women rarely lasted long. As she stepped inside, she noticed how the office felt like a war zone of egos. Men in expensive hoodies argued loudly over processor speeds. Men with sharp haircuts walked fast, carrying laptops covered in stickers about dominance, innovation, and grind culture. The silence between arguments was filled with the sound of keyboards and humming servers. Liana reached the lobby, where a tall receptionist looked up and blinked as if surprised to see her. The receptionist asked if she had an appointment. Liana lifted her badge and nodded. The receptionist hesitated, then directed her to the elevator closest to the server core room. Inside the elevator, she could feel her heartbeat rise. She should have felt afraid or overwhelmed, but instead she felt something else, a quiet fire burning deep under her ribs. She was not here to survive. She was here to change things. When the elevator opened, she stepped into a cold floor where rows of glass offices lined the hallway. Inside each one sat engineers and analysts surrounded by screens and code. She saw a group of men glance at her, then return to their screens. She heard a whisper, "Is she new?" Another voice replied, "Must be." One more voice added, "Let's see how long she lasts." Liana ignored them and walked toward the onboarding room. Her mentor was waiting, a senior engineer named Marcus Vale, a legend in the firm for designing Vanguard OS, the system that powered all their AI research. Marcus shook her hand without smiling. He motioned toward a seat. He began the training session, describing the hierarchy of the company, the labs, the server clusters, the regulation protocols, and the innovation tiers. Throughout the entire explanation, he did not ask her about her background, her degree, or her specialty. It was clear he did not expect her to last beyond probation. When the session ended, Marcus handed her a keycard and pointed to a workstation desk 20 meters away. He said, "You will be working on anomaly detection for medical systems. Good luck." Then, without looking back, he left through another door. Liana sat at her workstation and opened the project repository. In seconds, she realized the codebase was broken, half-documented, and poorly optimized. A dozen engineers had tried to fix it and failed. That was why they assigned it to a newcomer. They assumed she would fail as well. That was how this place worked. Instead of fear, Liana felt excitement. Her fingers danced on the keyboard as she began rewriting data structures, eliminating redundant layers, and designing a new model that could learn from sparse medical datasets. She lost track of time. She forgot everyone around her. She forgot the whispers. She only remembered the future she wanted. After 6 hours, she finally paused. She leaned back and reviewed the new architecture. She had rebuilt 40% of the system, and it was finally stable. She tested it on synthetic datasets and watched the logs scroll. One engineer silently walked behind her, saw the results, and froze. He whispered to himself, "Impossible!" By the time night arrived, half the office emptied. Only the hardcore engineers stayed. Liana stood up to stretch, and another senior engineer approached. He stared at her screen, then at her badge, then at her again, and said, "This is not beginner work. Who wrote this?" Liana said, "I did." The engineer frowned, not out of anger, but disbelief. Then he replied quietly, "You know they will not like this." Liana looked directly at him and said, "I did not come here so they would like me. I came here to build things that matter." The engineer stared at her for a few seconds, then walked away without another word. But the server logs kept running quietly, proving she was right. Morning light crept through the tall, reflective windows of Vanguard Systems as Liana entered again for her second day. The building still felt enormous and cold, but now she noticed details she had missed before. There were robotics labs behind glass doors. There were autonomous drones traveling along suspended rails. And there were entire hallways restricted by biometric gates. The company was not just big, it was powerful and secretive. She walked down the engineering corridor where screens flickered with live code branches and memory diagnostics. Everyone around her seemed locked in a silent battle against logic and computation, yet the air was tense with skepticism. The rumor of her code rewrite had already spread. Her presence had become an unspoken anomaly, and in this tech fortress, anomalies were treated as potential threats. When she reached her desk, she opened the anomaly detection system again. The logs from last night were still running. The performance metrics showed a dramatic improvement with reduced latency and higher prediction accuracy. Soon she felt a presence standing behind her. She turned slowly, expecting another cynical remark, but instead was met with Marcus Vale, her mentor. Marcus crossed his arms and stared at her screen for a long, heavy silence. He scanned the architecture, then looked at the performance charts. Then he spoke in a flat tone. "Who told you to rewrite the entire framework?" Liana stayed calm and replied, "The previous architecture was unstable and inefficient. If we want this system to pass medical regulations, we need a model that learns faster and fails safer." Marcus kept staring as if analyzing her answer. Then he stated, "There is a hierarchy here, Blake. You do not get to rewrite core systems without authorization." Liana nodded slightly and answered, "I submitted documentation and version notes. I followed procedure." Marcus looked surprised, as if expecting her to be reckless. He leaned closer and checked the repository history. He clicked through commit messages, test results, and performance graphs. His expression changed slowly from suspicion to curiosity. He finally said, "Your implementation might actually work, and without adding overhead. That is rare, Blake. Very rare." Liana waited, but Marcus shook his head and stepped back. "This will cause friction. You understand that, right? You outperformed engineers who have been here for 10 years, and you did it overnight." Liana replied, "I am not here to compete. I am here to innovate and solve real problems." Marcus did not respond. Instead, he walked away briskly, leaving Liana staring at her screen, unsure if she had gained respect or made an enemy. Later that afternoon, the team was called into the main briefing hall, a massive space with holographic displays that showed data models, network maps, and prototype demos. The hall filled with engineers, executives, and research leads. Everyone settled into seats, and the head of research, Dr. Elias Crawford, entered wearing a sharp suit and a stern expression. Crawford was a figure of authority, known for strict evaluation and perfectionism. He approached the podium and began speaking about quarterly progress, failures, and future expectations. He spoke about how Vanguard systems must stay ahead of global AI competition, how innovation must be relentless, and how mediocrity would not survive here. Then he paused and gestured toward a screen showing the anomaly detection project. He stated, "Our medical anomaly system has seen an unexpected performance spike overnight. We will conduct a review to determine cause and long-term viability." Murmurs filled the room as the performance metrics appeared on the screens. Dramatic improvements were visible in every category. A few engineers shifted uncomfortably, others glared. Liana knew exactly what this meant. They would dissect her work publicly. After the meeting ended, several engineers approached her. One scoffed and said, "Who do you think you are, making us look bad?" Another muttered, "This is why we don't hire fresh grads." A third asked, "Did Marcus help you? Because no way you did this alone." Liana ignored them and returned to her desk, refusing to let bitterness infect her progress. But she could feel isolation growing, like a cold shadow. When the lunch break came, she sat alone in the cafeteria, quietly eating while men at nearby tables argued about blockchain security and cloud dominance. Suddenly, she felt her chair shift as someone sat across from her. She looked up to find the same senior engineer from last night. His badge read Ryland Singh. He had dark, focused eyes and a serious demeanor. Ryland spoke without hostility. "I looked through your commits. The design is clean and efficient. You did not just optimize the system, you expanded its capabilities." Liana waited, unsure if he was praising or interrogating her. Rylan continued, "This company thrives on innovation, but it hates surprises. You surprised them. That is why you are getting backlash, not because you're underqualified, but because you're not following unwritten rules." Liana replied, "I'm not here to obey traditions that slow progress. I want to build tech that improves lives." Rylan nodded slowly and replied, "I respect that, but you need allies here, or they will bury your work." Before she could reply, a loud mechanical signal echoed through the cafeteria, alerting staff back to work. Rylan stood and said quietly before leaving, "You are not the first woman to join this place, Blake, but you might be the first to challenge its core systems. Good luck." The rest of the day passed under heavy silence. Liana submitted additional documentation, prepared test scenarios, and analyzed edge cases. Late in the evening, she was about to leave when her monitor pinged with a system notification. It read, "Mandatory technical review session, tomorrow. Participant, Liana Blake. Location, Lab 3, time 0900. Liana inhaled slowly. She knew exactly what that meant. They were going to evaluate her work, her skills, and perhaps her right to stay. That night, she returned home exhausted. Her small apartment was filled with books on machine learning, hardware schematics, and whiteboards covered in mathematical symbols. She dropped her laptop bag and sat on the floor, leaning against the couch. She felt fear creeping into her mind, not fear of failing, but fear of being dismissed before she could prove her worth. She closed her eyes and remembered her childhood, her mother working double shifts to afford tutoring, her father fixing old computers with her late into the night, her teacher telling her that robotics was not for girls, her classmates laughing when she said she wanted to build intelligent machines. Each memory ignited a spark in her chest. She stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and began writing notes for the review. She outlined Bayesian validation, medical compliance models, neural decision boundaries, failure audit trails, and interpretability standards. She worked until the sun rose, painting her apartment with gold light. The next morning, she returned to Vanguard Systems with tired eyes but a steady mind. She arrived at Lab 3, where a panel of engineers, executives, and senior researchers sat in front of a large display. Crawford was there. Rylan was there, and Dr. Crawford sat at the center, staring sharply as Liana entered. Crawford spoke first. "Sit, Blake. We will begin immediately." Liana took her seat and waited. The display lit up with her architecture design and performance summaries. Crawford continued, "This system shows potential, but we must determine whether it is reliable, scalable, and compliant. Begin explanation." Liana felt her pulse pounding in her ears, but her voice stayed steady as she started to speak. This was not just a test of skill. This was a battle for legitimacy. The lights in Lab 3 dimmed slightly as the holographic display projected the internal workings of her redesigned system. Neural pathways traced across the air like blue veins, and data nodes pulsed with simulated signals. The panel watched in strict silence, waiting for her explanation. Liana took a slow breath and began. This architecture was designed for medical anomaly detection using an adaptive learning model focused on rare conditions. It reduces false positives while improving interpretability for physicians. The system learns from minimal data and adjusts its confidence levels based on risk gradients. Crawford tapped a stylus against his tablet without expression. The panel remained silent, forcing her to continue. The system works by analyzing medical sensor streams, imaging data, and genomic markers. When it detects a potential anomaly, it generates an explainable output rather than a black box output, providing the doctor with insight into how the decision was made. Marcus leaned forward, studying the projected decision tree relationships. Rylan nodded, slightly impressed. Crawford, however, remained unreadable. After she finished the opening statement, Crawford finally spoke. "Explain how your system passes regulatory constraints without sacrificing performance." Liana described her validation layers and consistency checkers built to handle medical compliance. She outlined the statistical safeguards against training bias, the auditing functions, and the interpretability standards. The panel watched while she navigated through a maze of technical reasoning with clarity and precision. When she finished, Crawford stared at her for several long seconds. His face showed no reaction. He simply said, "Demonstrate it." Liana activated the simulation. The holographic system ran patient scenarios using synthetic medical data generated overnight. The model flagged cardiac irregularities, detected early neurological warning signs, and provided transparent decision paths for each diagnosis. The metrics displayed in the air, showing accuracy, timing, and confidence gradients. "Incredible," Marcus whispered, almost involuntarily. Some panel members exchanged uneasy glances. Others scribbled notes. More scenarios played on the display until Crawford raised his hand, signaling a stop. He addressed the room. "This system is unorthodox, unapproved, unrequested. Blake implemented changes that alter our risk models and shift the direction of this project. There are concerns about protocol authority and alignment." Liana listened, feeling that heavy tightening in her chest, the feeling of being challenged for daring to outperform expectations. It was not enough to be brilliant here. She had to earn permission to be brilliant. Ryland spoke suddenly, cutting the silence. "I have reviewed her code and tested it against benchmark datasets. It outperforms our current system in all critical metrics. I recommend continuing development instead of shutting this down." Several panel members frowned at his boldness. Crawford turned towards him and asked, "Are you willing to stake your evaluation score on that recommendation, Singh?" Ryland paused only for a moment, then nodded, "Yes, I am." Crawford returned his gaze to Liana. "Blake, you have shown technical competence, but Vanguard does not reward rogue behavior. You must understand that innovation must operate within chains of command." Liana replied steadily, "I followed documentation protocols, submitted commits, wrote test cases, and provided performance logs. The only thing I did beyond expectation is succeed." Several engineers shifted in their seats, perhaps uncomfortable with the undeniable nature of her statement. Crawford stared at her as if dissecting her resolve. Then he announced, "The panel will deliberate. Please wait outside." She gathered her laptop and exited the lab into a quiet hallway. She leaned against the cold metal wall, letting her mind race. She had just defended her work in front of some of the toughest experts in the company, and now everything hung on a decision made behind closed doors. She stood there for nearly an hour, listening to muffled voices through the heavy door. Every few minutes, someone walked past, glancing at her badge and realizing she was the subject of the review. Some smirked, some looked curious, others indifferent, but none offered comfort. Finally, the door opened and the panel filed out without expression. Marcus passed her last and simply said, "They will inform you shortly." His tone revealed nothing. Later that afternoon, she received a message requesting her in Crawford's office. She walked through the executive wing, where glass walls revealed conference rooms filled with strategists, lawyers, and financial analysts discussing high-level decisions. She felt like an intruder, stepping into a world not meant for newcomers, and definitely not meant for women who defied tradition. She knocked and entered Crawford's office. It was large, cold, and minimalistic, with a wall of screens showing global tech headlines, supply chain forecasts, and competitor reports. Crawford stood with his back to her, looking out the window, as if studying the city skyline like a chessboard. He finally spoke, without turning. "Around here, Blake, you will hear a phrase. Disruption is seductive, but structure wins wars. Do you understand what that means?" Liana replied respectfully, "Yes. It means innovation without discipline collapses, I agree, but discipline without innovation stagnates." Crawford turned then and faced her, his eyes sharp with calculated assessment. "The panel has decided to allow your architecture to enter an extended trial phase under direct supervision. You will continue the project, but not alone." He pressed a button on his console, and a notification appeared on her tablet listing assigned teammates, Rylan, Marcus, and 2 engineers she had never met. They would act as oversight and support, whether they liked it or not. Crawford continued, "You are talented, Blake, but talent alone does not survive long in Vanguard or in this industry. Men here have built walls over decades, and they expect you to walk around them quietly. You chose to climb over one. Instead of punishing you, I want to see if you can climb again without falling." Liana replied calmly, "I do not plan to fall." Crawford nodded. "Then do not make me regret this decision. Now go. You have work to do." Liana left the office with her heart pounding. She had won a partial victory. The door had not fully opened, but it was no longer locked. The days that followed were intense and grueling. Her assigned team gathered in a research lab filled with cooling fans, cable bundles, and rows of monitors. Marcus acted as lead, reviewing her architecture line by line. Rylan handled benchmarking and stress tests, while the other two engineers monitored compliance and documentation standards. At first, the tension was suffocating. The two unfamiliar engineers, Victor and Hayden, were dismissive and cold. They questioned her design choices, tried to catch her mistakes, and whispered to each other when they thought she couldn't hear. It was a test, not just of skill, but of endurance and pride. Despite it all, Liana kept her voice steady and her mind sharp. She answered questions thoroughly, improved her code, and proved her logic again and again. Victor tried to challenge her on model interpretability. She demonstrated how her approach offered better traceability. Hayden tried to criticize her risk profiles. She showed how her safety margins actually exceeded standards. Slowly and reluctantly, their hostility turned to respect, or at least acknowledgement. They couldn't deny what she built worked and worked well. One night, far past office hours, Rylan approached her workstation as she compared performance charts under background simulations. Without looking up, she asked, "Why are you still here?" Rylan replied, "Because you're building something that deserves to exist, and I want to see it finished." Liana paused, unsure what to say. Rylan added quietly, "This company has incredible people, but it also has blind spots. You're forcing it to see again. That takes a different kind of strength." Before she could respond, the lights dimmed and the automated voice announced, "End of work cycle. Please exit the facility." She packed her things silently and walked out into the cold night air with Rylan beside her, both exhausted yet strangely alive. The project continued to evolve over the following weeks, but while her system grew stronger, the whispers in the company grew louder. There were rumors that certain directors disliked the attention her work was getting, rumors that some veterans wanted the project reassigned, rumors that Vanguard was preparing for corporate restructuring and unapproved innovation could be seen as a liability. One afternoon, Marcus approached her desk and said, "Blake, Crawford wants a progress demo tomorrow morning. Bring your best results. Something tells me this one will decide more than just project status." As he walked away, Liana stared at the simulation charts on her screen. Her model now performed at levels that could revolutionize medical diagnostics, save lives, and disrupt entire markets. But disruption came with enemies, and the next day she would meet them face to face. The day of the progress demo arrived with a heavy sense of expectation. Liana woke early and reviewed her simulation logs one last time. She stood in front of her mirror, practicing her brief summary. She did not care about impressing them with charm. She only cared about proving that her system deserved to exist. She left her apartment and traveled to Vanguard Systems, feeling the cold morning air sharp on her face, reminding her that clarity often came with discomfort. When she entered the building, her badge beeped against the sensor, and the gate opened with a mechanical hum. She walked through familiar halls, past drone rails, past research hubs, past security stations, until she reached the demonstration floor, a large room designed for corporate presentations with holographic screens and elevated seating for executives. Victor, Hayden, and Marcus were already preparing equipment. Rylan was reviewing final benchmarking data. He nodded at her as she approached, and she felt a flicker of reassurance. The room slowly filled with directors, project leads, and analysts of various departments. Some were silent and serious, others whispered among themselves, watching Liana with cautious eyes. No one offered a greeting to her personally. Instead, they addressed Marcus, or one of the other men, completely skipping her presence as if she were a background accessory rather than the architect of the system. Then, the final group entered. Dr. Elias Crawford, accompanied by two senior directors and the head of Medical Compliance Department. A stern woman named Dr. Meredith Hale. Hale carried a tablet covered in regulatory tags and notes. Her expression was severe and disciplined. She looked at Liana briefly, not with hostility, but with cold evaluation, as if assessing the quality of a machine part. Crawford stood before the audience and began the session. Innovation Review for Anomaly Detection System led by Marcus Vale and team. Begin demonstration. Even this phrasing erased her role. Marcus gave a slight nod toward Liana, indicating her moment. She stepped forward, and the holographic display activated, flooding the room with blue and white projections of neural pathways, data timelines, and interpretability trees. She began speaking clearly. This system enhances anomaly detection for medical diagnostics using adaptive sparse data learning. It identifies rare conditions at early stages, interprets decision paths for medical professionals, and reduces diagnostic uncertainty. It meets compliance standards for explainability and audit trails, while outperforming baseline systems in accuracy, latency, and safety margins. The audience watched without reaction. Some leaned forward, some crossed their arms. Dr. Hale tapped her tablet repeatedly. Crawford kept an unreadable expression. After the introduction, Marcus triggered the simulations. The system analyzed medical scans, heart rate streams, genomic patterns, and various clinical markers. For each case, it produced a transparent decision output with highlighted features and risk rankings linked to physiological patterns. After several minutes, Marcus paused the demonstration. Crawford asked Dr. Hale for her assessment. Hale spoke with measured tone. The interpretability layer satisfies compliance expectations. The risk margins appear sufficient for early-stage regulatory review. However, I need confirmation that the system can maintain performance under incomplete data conditions. Liana responded confidently. It can. We designed the model to infer missing data through probabilistic reconstruction rather than forcing full context. If needed, I can demonstrate. Hale gestured for the demonstration, and Marcus loaded datasets with missing values. The model processed them without collapse and produced decisions with adjusted confidence levels. Hale nodded slightly, approving. She looked at Crawford and stated, "The architecture is technically sound. This is not amateur work." Some directors exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus looked proud. Victor and Hayden remained silent. Rylan watched everything with focused attention. Crawford then addressed the room. What are the primary concerns against approving the system for continued development? One director raised his voice first. This model was implemented without directive. It challenges existing hierarchy and resource allocation. It sets a precedent for unilateral development. Another director stated, this could disrupt relationships with partner firms who expect incremental upgrades, not radical redesigns. It might introduce instability into our market strategy. A third director added, we have not evaluated the long-term financial outcomes or patent implications. The project needs risk assessment beyond engineering. None of these concerns questioned the system itself, only the politics around it. Liana stood silent, listening to men debate the validity of her work, not based on performance, but based on comfort and corporate order. She knew this battle well. Innovation was rarely destroyed by failure. It was destroyed by fear. Finally, Dr. Hale interrupted with firm precision. I do not care about partnerships or market narratives. I care about saving lives. This system has the potential to detect rare conditions earlier than existing solutions. That alone warrants continuation. Silence washed over the room. Crawford studied Hale. Then he addressed Liana. Your system is impressive, Blake, but as you can see, innovation introduces turbulence. Vanguard survives because it controls turbulence, so we need assurance that you and this team will work within strategic boundaries, not outside them. Liana responded calmly, I understand structure, but history has shown that technological progress rarely comes from comfort. It comes from disruption guided by responsibility. I am not here to undermine hierarchy. I am here to build technology that matters. If that is punished, then the punishment reveals the values of this institution, not mine. A few people looked shocked by her directness, but Hale seemed almost pleased. Crawford did not flinch. He simply waited, then nodded slowly. Dr. Hale closed her tablet and said, I support approval for continued development under compliance supervision. I will personally monitor safety protocols. Crawford turned to the directors. All in favor, raise hands. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. The project received provisional approval for clinical simulation phases. A wave of tension released from the team. Marcus exhaled. Rylan allowed a rare smile. Victor and Hayden seemed forced into reluctant acceptance, but they did not protest. After the meeting adjourned, people filed out. Some whispered with irritation, some nodded with respect, others avoided eye contact. Crawford approached Liana and spoke quietly. You won this round, Blake, but the game is bigger than you think. Learn to read the board, and you may survive to see your vision realized. Liana asked, and if I refuse to play games? Crawford answered, then someone else will play for you, and you will lose control of your own creation. He walked away, leaving those words behind, like a warning, or an invitation, or both. The following weeks were a blur of progress, testing, and documentation. The system advanced rapidly as the team integrated clinical simulation engines, processed anonymized medical datasets, and created physician-friendly reporting tools. Dr. Hale frequently visited labs, ensuring compliance and safety. She challenged Liana fiercely, demanding evidence, explanations, and safeguards, which only strengthened the architecture. During late nights alone, Liana often wondered about the future. She had gained a small foothold in a fortress built by men who guarded power through tradition and quiet exclusion. She had allies, but she also had enemies. She felt accomplishment, but also awareness that her success had painted a target on her back. One night, after a long simulation cycle, Rylan found her staring at a wall of metrics. He asked, What are you thinking about? Liana replied, Whether this place wants innovation or only the illusion of innovation. Rylan leaned against the table and replied, Vanguard wants control above all, but sometimes control and innovation can coexist if someone stubborn enough forces the alignment. Liana looked at him. Are you calling me stubborn? Rylan smiled slightly. I am calling you necessary. Before she could reply, the lab lights shifted to standby mode, indicating the end of cycle. She gathered her notes and prepared to leave, but just as she reached the hallway, Victor intercepted her. His expression was tense and conflicted. He spoke quietly and without malice. Blake, listen. Some people are preparing to challenge the project during the next executive review. They cannot attack your code, so they will attack your credibility. Be ready. Liana asked, Why tell me this? Victor looked away. Because none of us could fix that system, and you did. I respect that, even if others do not. Good night, Blake. He walked away, leaving Liana alone in the quiet hallway. She felt both grateful and unsettled. The war had changed fronts, no longer technical, but personal. And personal wars were always more dangerous. The announcement that Liana would remain project lead sent quiet shockwaves through the organization. Some celebrated silently, some fumed. Others pretended not to care. But no one ignored it anymore. The system had survived political sabotage and emerged stronger than before. Now came the next phase, clinical pilot partnerships, which meant interaction with hospitals, regulators, investors, and medical boards. The stakes escalated from internal politics to global scrutiny. Liana remained composed on the outside, but inside she felt the pressure building. She had fought nonstop for months, and now the battlefield had grown 10 times larger. She returned to the lab that evening and found the team already discussing deployment frameworks. Marcus, Rylan, Victor, and Hayden gathered around a large display showing integration models for medical facilities. Marcus looked at her and said, "Congratulations, you won leadership. Now let us make sure you keep it." Victor added quietly, "If this pilot works, there will be no room left for anyone to undermine the project." Hayden nodded reluctantly. "I will admit I did not believe this would get this far, but at this point I want to see it succeed." Their shift in tone was subtle, but real. Respect earned through relentless performance, not through social acceptance. Liana joined them, and they worked late, adjusting clinical interface designs and streamlining onboarding protocols. At around midnight, Marcus stretched his arms and said, "The pilot will include 3 partner hospitals across different regions. That means different infrastructure, different physician cultures, and different regulatory interpretations. We must prepare for all of them." Liana replied, "We will build adaptive modules for each facility to reduce friction and improve adoption. If physicians cannot use it easily, then technology means nothing." The following week brought new challenges. The first was mediated audits from a partner hospital with a stern clinical review board. They requested access to interpretability logs, uncertainty metrics, and failure case reports. Rylan prepared benchmarking sets while Liana prepared demonstrations using de-identified case studies. Hale assisted by ensuring regulatory compliance for medical ethics. Every time Hale walked into the lab, people straightened up because she radiated authority that came from a lifetime of saving lives, not from corporate hierarchy. During one audit session, a senior physician asked sharply, "How can we trust a machine to interpret anomalies better than specialists with decades of experience?" Liana answered without apology, "The system is not replacing specialists. It is assisting them by highlighting rare conditions earlier and providing transparent reasoning to support medical decisions. No one here claims that algorithms hold human wisdom. They simply enhance human capability." The physician stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You answer like someone who believes in what they build. That is good. Medicine needs conviction, not just clever code." After the audit, the team gathered for a private meeting to review feedback. Victor pointed at a list on the screen and said, "They want lower response latency, especially for emergency scenarios, and they want training modules for clinicians who are not familiar with AI-based decision systems." Hayden added, "We can implement an accelerated inference path for emergency modes and build interactive training scenarios with synthetic patient timelines." Marcus nodded, "And we need to translate interpretability visuals into formats familiar to physicians, or they will not trust the system no matter how accurate it is." Liana looked at the notes, thinking deeply, then said, "We will redesign the user layer to match clinical cognition patterns instead of technical data views. This is not about showing how smart the system is. It is about making doctors feel informed and empowered." They spent the next 2 weeks implementing those changes. The interface improved significantly. Users could toggle between high-level summaries and detailed decision logs. Physicians could review uncertainty explanations, confidence gradients, and cross-marker relationships. It made the system feel less artificial and more like a highly observant colleague. The pilot launch day at the first hospital arrived. Liana and Rylan traveled with a small team to oversee integration. They entered a large, modern medical facility filled with polished floors, patient transport robots, and electronic record terminals. The chief medical officer greeted them with a firm handshake and neutral expression. He led them through corridors into a clinical command room with large displays and diagnostic stations. Physicians, nurses, and technicians filled the space, preparing for demonstrations. Rylan handled the technical integration, while Liana presented the clinical workflow. The physicians watched as the system analyzed historical patient data and flagged patterns that correlated with serious conditions, detected months later in real records. A cardiologist leaned forward, studying the projection, and murmured, "If this had been here 3 years ago, 2 of my patients might have lived longer." Another physician, a neurologist, asked detailed questions about false positives. Liana answered each question patiently, clarifying how the system adjusted threshold sensitivity based on physician preference and risk tolerance. The neurologist nodded approvingly. This could reduce diagnostic burnout, especially for rare diseases that slip past standard systems. The pilot continued for several days, and the feedback, though rigorous, was largely positive. The system was not perfect, but it was respected, which mattered more. Most importantly, no one questioned Liana as project lead because results speak louder than assumptions. The chief medical officer requested that the system remain for extended testing, stating, "We need tools that help us see what our eyes cannot." When Liana returned to Vanguard headquarters, she found Crawford waiting near the research wing. His presence always meant significance, positive or negative. He studied her quietly before speaking. "I heard the pilot went well." Liana replied, "It exceeded expectations. Physicians challenged the system but also acknowledged its value." Crawford nodded. "There will be more resistance ahead, especially from investors who fear disruptive change. Medicine is an old kingdom, and old kingdoms do not welcome revolutions easily. But if you continue to win clinical trust, the corporate world will have no choice but to follow." She met his gaze directly. "I do not intend to win because I'm convenient. I intend to win because the system saves lives." Crawford gave a rare, faint smile. "Perhaps that is why you survived longer than most disruptors. You do not chase conquest. You chase purpose." Over the next month, the second and third pilot sites began. Preliminary reports returned with strong performance metrics. Improvements in early anomaly detection, physician usability, and patient outcomes. One report stated, "This system identified neurological risk markers for 2 patients who had not yet developed visible symptoms, potentially enabling early intervention." That line alone justified every battle, every late night, every dismissal, and every political attack. But victory always brings new enemies. The financial division now demanded presentations for investor groups and partnership discussions with major healthcare firms. They wanted growth projections, profitability scenarios, patent potential, and long-term strategic value. They cared about markets, not lives. Liana found herself sitting in a conference room full of men in suits, discussing the system as if it were a commodity instead of a clinical instrument. One investor asked, "What is the valuation target for this product at full market penetration?" Another investor asked, "How does this differentiate from our competitors in terms of brand leverage?" Liana answered politely, but with clarity. "Clinical value first. Profit follows impact, not the other way around. If you try to reverse that equation, you will slow innovation and lose physician trust." Some investors frowned, unsure how to handle a woman who would not speak in their preferred currency. Others looked intrigued. Crawford stayed silent, observing reactions like a chess player watching pieces move. After the meeting, Crawford approached her and said, "Investors are not doctors, Blake. They will not care about ethics unless those ethics generate revenue. Try to speak in both languages, or they will replace your voice with someone who does." Liana responded calmly, "If they think profit matters more than patience, they can listen to someone else. I will not translate human suffering into financial models." Crawford studied her quietly and then said, "You remind me of someone I knew when I was younger, someone who believed technology existed to elevate humanity, not to monetize it. That man lost his company, but changed the world regardless." She asked him, "And what do you think happened to him?" Crawford replied, "He learned that you can't change systems by avoiding them. You must enter them and bend them without breaking yourself." His words echoed in her mind long after he walked away. Meanwhile, rumors of acquisition offers and partnership bids grew louder. The world outside Vanguard was beginning to take notice. Journalists requested interviews, medical boards requested demonstrations, universities requested research collaboration. Suddenly, Liana was not just a talented engineer, she was a symbol of disruption. Symbols attract both admiration and danger. One night, as she left the facility, she received an anonymous message on her secure tablet. It contained only 5 words: "You are not safe here." She stared at the screen, expressionless, but her pulse quickened. The threat was not physical. It was strategic. Someone within Vanguard was preparing a move, one designed not to attack the system, but
Pilot phase approval changed everything. The project was no longer a lab curiosity. It was now a technology that would step into real clinics with real patients and real stakes. The transition was heavy and demanding. Layers of legal procedures, physician training, and deployment architecture consumed the team for weeks. Liana barely slept and lived in the lab, drifting through days with determination instead of energy. But pilot approval also electrified a different group of people. The same male directors who had questioned her leadership began to position themselves near the project, attempting to shape public perception to align with their narratives. They wanted to benefit from the work without acknowledging the person behind it. It was a familiar pattern across industry. Achievements made by outsiders often repackaged by insiders for comfort and recognition. Liana refused to let the story slip away. She documented her progress, spoke directly to physicians, and collaborated with clinics that valued diverse expertise. Hale remained fiercely protective of clinical integrity and became an unexpected shield against corporate vultures. Rylan remained in the strategist role, ensuring deployment did not become corrupted by internal politics. Victor and Hayden handled system support and audit logging, forming the backbone of the pilot rollout. The first deployment site was a mid-size cardiac and neurological clinic with a strong reputation for early detection research. The physicians were cautious but curious. The system integrated smoothly and within days detected subtle cardiovascular anomalies in a patient who came in for routine dizziness. Had the anomaly gone unnoticed, the patient could have suffered a serious event within months. The physicians were stunned, not by theatrics, but by the quiet precision of the system. Word traveled quickly. Medical journals requested interviews, investors asked for meetings, regulators requested briefings. Suddenly, the project that directors considered unstable became a centerpiece of strategic planning. Crawford observed it all with a neutral gaze, yet everyone could tell his influence behind the scenes was shaping a new direction. Despite the progress, Liana felt the weight of constant scrutiny. Everywhere she went, someone was evaluating her, as if waiting for her to stumble to confirm their assumptions. One morning, before a regulatory briefing, a senior advisor casually remarked, "It is rare to see a woman so young in this kind of technical leadership role. I suppose that must feel empowering, or overwhelming, depending on the day." Liana replied calmly, "It feels normal. Competence is not gendered nor age-bound. The real question is why people are still surprised." The advisor blinked, taken off guard, then nodded slowly. There is truth in that statement. Regulatory briefing days were intense. Hale handled safety compliance, Liana handled technical explainability, Marcus assisted with documentation, Rylan answered infrastructural questions, and Crawford observed quietly from the back. For the first time, the regulatory panel expressed cautious optimism rather than fear. They saw clarity instead of black box mystery, and responsibility instead of arrogance. However, outside the regulatory rooms, the pilot entered its most dangerous stage. Media coverage, investors, partners, public relations. Departments that once dismissed Liana now wanted to present her as a symbol of corporate diversity. But with symbols comes erasure. They wanted her image, not her voice. They wanted her presence, not her challenge. They wanted to rewrite her story to fit their narratives. One afternoon, a communications director approached her with a scripted media speech. It replaced her technical language with vague corporate optimism and removed references to struggle, gender bias, and the actual scientific challenges. When Liana finished reading it, she looked up and said, "This erases the truth.
You want a sanitized version that offends no one and informs no one, and that is not acceptable. The director frowned and said, "We must protect investor alignment and partner comfort. The details you want to mention might create unnecessary friction." Liana answered with absolute clarity. Progress creates friction. Innovation creates friction. Comfort creates stagnation. I will not pretend that this technology emerged without resistance. If investors cannot handle reality, then they do not belong in this space. The director hesitated, then left without arguing. Crawford must have heard, because later he summoned Liana privately. His office overlooked the research floor, a symbolic vantage point of observation rather than control. He looked at her in silence for a long moment before speaking. "You are creating allies and enemies, Blake. Both are consequences of pushing boundaries. You understand that, yes?" Liana answered, "Yes, sir, and I accept those consequences." Crawford nodded slowly. "Then continue, but choose your battles with strategy, not just principle. Principles win moral wars. Strategies win real ones." It was the closest thing to approval she would ever get from him, and she understood its value. The final milestone of the pilot came 6 months later, when 3 separate clinics submitted validation reports confirming significant improvement in early detection rates. Physicians praised interpretability, patients appreciated transparency, regulators acknowledged responsible design, investors swarmed like insects to a light source. The board assembled one last time to decide whether the technology would become a flagship product. The atmosphere was different. Not dismissive, not merely curious. It was tense with expectation. Hale presented clinical data. Rylan presented deployment analytics. Marcus presented documentation compliance. Hayden presented audit stability. Victor presented uptime and failure logs. And finally, Liana spoke about the architecture and future roadmap. She ended with, "We are not replacing doctors. We are removing guesswork. We are not chasing profit. We are chasing lives saved. If the company supports that mission, then we move forward. If not, then this technology deserves to go somewhere that will." Silence filled the room. Then Crawford stood and said, "The board votes in favor of flagship adoption. The system will integrate into national healthcare partnerships with Blake as chief technical architect." Shock spread across several faces, including those who once tried to remove her leadership. They had lost both the political battle and the cultural one. Months later, during the first national deployment conference, Liana walked onto the stage in front of physicians, regulators, researchers, and industry leaders. The lights dimmed, the display activated, and for the first time, she did not feel like an intruder in her own field. She felt like what she had always been, an innovator. Nothing more, nothing less. She spoke not as a symbol, not as a diversity candidate, not as an exception, but as a leader in technology who had built something valuable and real. Her final words to the audience were simple. "I was told this field was not for me, so I made space. The next generation should not have to make space. They should find it waiting for them." The audience arose in a standing ovation, not for a spectacle, but for a breakthrough. There were no whispered jokes about gender, no quiet doubts about legitimacy, only respect earned through relentless evidence. And so, Liana Blake did what many claimed was impossible. She broke through a male-dominated field, not by asking for permission, but by proving it not necessary.